Now, retired Las Vegas Metropolitan Police Lieutenant Randy Sutton is on the ground in Tucson. He joins us now. Randy, good to see you again. Thanks for taking the time, sir. So, what do you make of this? That I mean, it's I don't want to say it's a kind of zigzag nature to this investigation, but you could be forgiven for thinking that they go out in the hills and they search and they come back and they say we didn't find anything. Then they follow one lead and then they come back to searching again. You know, the other day they've got a dipstick down in a hole. We don't know if it was a septic tank or a sewer or something else. I mean, piece it out for us. Tell us what they're up to here.
Well, I think there are two most likely scenarios here. They are clearly looking for something that I am going to venture a guess was tossed from a vehicle. That makes sense given the circumstances of this search. And they're putting a lot of personnel into it, which tells me that they're looking at this seriously. Now, I think there's two most likely scenarios. One is that they received a phone tip that said, if you do this, you may find this. And that would spur something like this on, maybe something a little more specific. You know, if you look for a phone, you might find it, that kind of thing. The other is I think more likely, and that is as the digital evidence comes in from the cell phone towers that the FBI has been examining, there could have been some indication that something was, that they lost, you know, communications with a device or something. I think that may be more likely, but of course, I'm just surmising.
Right. So this investigation went from a snail's pace to a full gallop yesterday when the video information from the front doorbell of Nancy Guthrie came out. A man was briefly detained and let go. There was also a search conducted of a residence in Rio Rico. Here's what the Pima County Sheriff said about that. Investigators have completed their search of a property in Rio Rico. Nancy Guthrie investigation is ongoing. No further details at this time. Despite the new momentum yesterday, it's looking like this could go on for a long time. Here's what Kash Patel said last night.
I do believe we are looking at people who, as we say, are persons of interest. But as you know, with any investigation, you are a person of interest until you're either eliminated or you're actually found to be the culprit or the culprit's involved. And that's the stage we're at right now.
Right. So there's, you know, you get a tip, you get a lot of police activity, but so far, no joy.
No, unfortunately, you're right. And you know, yesterday when the determination came out that they were going to leave, we saw the SWAT trucks leave here and go to a property down in Rio Rico, and that there had been a vehicle stop made and someone detained. There was a lot of excitement, a lot of you know, thoughts that you know, perhaps this was coming to a conclusion. But you know, this is the problem with law enforcement investigations. You're going to run into dead ends. What it did show, though, is that they are actively pursuing these leads. This is good policing. And we have seen that, you know, as the days tick by, we saw inertia, you know, in the last, you know, after the first couple of days, there was some inertia. And then when this incredible videotape was released to the public, it is without a doubt causing a deluge of tips coming in.
Right, and they've got to sift through those one by one by one. And you know, all it takes is a tip that they hit on, and suddenly this case is solved. So we'll see if that happens. Randy, thanks for being with us again. Appreciate your time.
Sure thing. Thanks for having me.
Sandra?
Better than expected jobs numbers come.
Back to our top story in the search for Nancy Guthrie. Could images recovered from her doorbell camera break the case wide open? Former Detective Morgan White is a cybersecurity expert, founder of the National Center for Open and Unsolved Cases. Morgan, good to have you with us this afternoon. So a lot of tips coming in. We understand that the FBI phone has been ringing off the hook. Last night, it led to the brief detainment of a man named Carlos Palazuelos in Rio Rico, which is some distance south of Tucson. Here's what he said when our correspondent Matt Finn caught up with him.
I felt like I was being kidnapped, bro, because they didn't tell me anything at the beginning. Until right now, all I know is that they showed my in-law a picture of somebody wearing a mask or something, and they supposedly looked like my eyes.
Right, okay.
That's it. That's all I know.
So again, he was detained, he was questioned, he was eventually released, but it's an indication that the FBI and the local police are not leaving any stone unturned as they chase down these leads.
Yeah, John, you know what this is? It's a data point, obviously not a conclusion, but you would expect them to at least, I don't want to say just do something, but they did follow something that appeared to be credible. I don't think they're going to go out and do something that jeopardizes the integrity of the investigation, or say, well, you guys got, you got somebody who's 5'2" and 300 pounds. That would have been a total, complete one-off. So I think they're doing this, but I think that what you do is, like with Carlos and stuff, it tells you still three things that will help solve this case or identify. It's about time constraints. It's about technology, finding, there's some additional digital forensics out there and evidence, and then behaviors, looking at the behaviors of people during the crime and then post-crime. Who's acting quite differently than they were before the crime that maybe has a nexus to this or fits this description.
Right. So FBI Director Kash Patel said this to Sean Hannity last night on the recovered video. Listen here.
We were able to execute lawful searches and go to these private sector companies and expedite results, and then go into their systems and actually excavate material that people would think would normally be deleted and no one would look for. Thanks to this brilliant partnership, we were able to get it out, sharpen it with our technical capabilities at the FBI, and put it out to the world.
And as we look at an aerial shot, this is from our drone of FBI agents walking the roadway. Looks like they're looking to the side for anything that might have been thrown out of a car. There may be more video on the way. Morgan, I guess there were more cameras at the Guthrie house, and maybe those back channel storage areas with Google Nest might bear some fruit, or maybe there's other cameras like traffic cameras or something else along the way that may give them some clues. What's your confidence that we may see more of this?
Well, I think if you get it out of one camera, there's a high probability you're going to get it out of some of the others. Let me tell you, John, and I think I told you this before, 26 years ago, I trained the FBI on internet investigations. Well, the student has become the master. What they did was the equivalent of taking a match, searching in a dark forest with no moonlight to find a needle that's hidden out there somewhere. So it was an extreme amount of effort to go to this. But if the other cameras operated the same way, if you notice, the videos aren't very long. They're like 20 to 30 seconds. A lot of time that is collected by Google and Nest to train artificial intelligence on, to train their sensors on. So if it captured it from that camera, high probability it captured from the other cameras inside the house. Now, I say that. If they do have that video, this is the video that's going to help break open the case. The other video is going to be really for evidentiary purposes, seeing what happened inside the house, or verifying the claims of this, quote, ransom communication. I don't call it a ransom note yet, but communication that talks about the placement of the watch. How would that person know that? Is there any other evidence out there they could have seen? So this is coming together. But the other danger, too, John, is we want the FBI to be transparent. But I will tell you from working cases, you want to give the public everything they need to help, but you don't want to give them more, because what happens is you start getting these guys sending in fake Bitcoin or Bitcoin address, say, hey, I know who it is, give me a Bitcoin and I'll tell you who it is. All right, well, as we watch the investigators walking the roads on foot, Morgan, thank you for being with us. We appreciate it. You bet, John. All right, now this.
We must abolish ICE. We must turn off the spigot. We must stop the data collection. We must stop the immunity. We must have accountability.
A far-left congressional candidate getting closer to winning the nomination. How will her anti-ICE message play if she wins?
And the Alec Murdaugh case. Guess what? It's back in the headlines again. Could the guilty plea of a former court clerk help overturn his murder conviction?
In fact, joining me now is co-host of America's Most Wanted, Callahan Walsh. You might be the perfect person to ask about this inundation of tips coming into this tip line, Callahan. Now, you and your family have a great amount of history in using the public to solve very public crimes. I would have to imagine that that is an extremely intensive process of weeding out nonsense from what might be a real tip.
You're absolutely right. It is difficult to go through that volume of tips, especially coming in such a short amount of time. But we've relied on the power of the public for decades. America's Most Wanted has caught nearly 1,200 wanted fugitives in 31 different countries, 17 off the FBI's top 10 most wanted list, all because of tips that have come in to AMW. And, you do triage those tips. Some, you can kind of tell right off the bat aren't good. Some seem promising. And then there's some that, you're not sure about, but might be that little piece of the puzzle that breaks the case wide open, right? And law enforcement, they're receiving these tips and they're on the inside of the investigation. So they know what little key they're looking for, and that'll make it a lot easier for them to go through those 4,000 tips.
You know, Callahan, I have at various times in my life fallen down the rabbit hole of studying various serial killers. Morbid fascination, I guess. But one of the things I've learned over time is that many of the men who got away with multiple murders in American history had been alerted to law enforcement, whether or not that was through a tip line or somebody calling in directly to the police. And it sat there in the tip box. It sat there in the leads, in the file, sometimes for decades, never fully pursued or never fully taken seriously. So what is the process of figuring out whether or not you need to take a tip seriously, whether or not it's a real lead?
Well, unfortunately, a lot of times it's a gut feeling, and just having as much knowledge about the investigation as you can and seeing if that tip makes sense. Oftentimes it's an Occam's razor sort of situation where the simplest explanation is the correct one. But when you're taken in so many different directions, and this is why law enforcement can't release all the information all at once. They have to keep information, those cards close to the vest, because you will get inundated with tons and tons of erroneous tips that will take law enforcement in every single direction other than where they should go. But sometimes you get tips that are in that stack of needles that is overlooked. And that is so unfortunate when that happens. I mean, right now the FBI in Pima County is looking for a needle in a stack of needles. And it's going to be difficult for them to wade through all that. But again, they're on the inside. You can tell when a good tip comes in, they work that tip, and hopefully that outcome is positive.
All right, Callahan Walsh, thank you so much. Continue the good work over at America's Most Wanted.
51 minutes past the hour, and we have some brand new reporting from TMZ as law enforcement zeroes in on the person spotted on Nancy Guthrie's porch camera. They report the FBI and the Sheriff's Department are now focusing on the specific items he was carrying in those photos: the gloves, the backpack, the gun. TMZ says investigators are contacting manufacturers trying to track down who bought that exact combination of gear. Fox News at Night anchor Trace Gallagher is live outside of Nancy Guthrie's home, where he'll be hosting his show tonight, live at 11 p.m. Eastern Time. So, Trace, tell us what is happening right now.
Well, right now, we just learned a couple of seconds ago, Sandra, that two men, we do not know if they are law enforcement. We don't know who they are, but two men have now walked back into Annie Guthrie's house, which is about 4.5 miles from here. So if we find out more about that, we'll let you know what's happening. But a little activity down in Annie Guthrie's neighborhood all day long. Yesterday, you had FBI agents talking to neighbors and kind of going through that area. We are at Nancy Guthrie's house, and this is at the base of the Catalina foothills. And the Catalina foothills is kind of the basis for the search today. From here on up north toward the actual Catalina Foothill Mountains, you have FBI agents kind of going and checking all the roads and seeing, what they find. Nobody has told us specifically what they're looking for, but you can hear the news helicopters are up kind of tracking their progress. It is interesting because you mentioned the video, Sandra, and that is they're looking at the items, the gloves, the backpack. Where would you buy these things? That's a big part of it. Another big part of this thing is that if you look very closely at the video, there does not appear to be any blood at the very time that this video was taken, any blood on the front stoop of Nancy Guthrie's home. That's key because remember, there was that timeline from 1:47 until 2:21. Well, now, if Kash Patel, what they're telling us is correct, now it appears that if that is the 2:12 video that captured somebody and the pacemaker went off at 2:28, now all of a sudden that 41-minute window, it kind of contracts to 16 minutes, and that could be a big deal in the overall investigation here. Also very curious in last night's arrest, very curious, we shouldn't say arrest, detention, they were very careful about that, detention of that person. Kash Patel told us there were, quoting, persons of interest, plural. We have not heard any more about who else might be part of that. And very quickly, Sandra, I want to say that since February 1st, the FBI has gotten 18,000 tip line calls, and in the past 24 hours, 4,000 of those calls came in. So you can tell. And that is so challenging to dig through those and know what is a real tip that comes in. And obviously, there's a lot of speculation that is happening. Paraphrasing Paul Murrow earlier, basically saying that tracing the clothing is going to be so key. He was suggesting that that particular, top that the person was wearing on the porch, seen in the camera, was something more specific than a generic purchase, I should say.
So hopefully, Trace, this is something that could lead them to the suspect.
Well, I mean, there's so much information in that video. That's the whole thing. Not just the person's walk, not just the eyebrows like we were talking about and you know, things that they did, but actually the clothing. I mean, they were already, last night we were on the show and we had Kirk Knudsen on, the cyber guy. He was talking about how it's so quick you can go in and find out where those gloves were sold, and the combination of the backpack and the gloves. Where were these all sold and what time, what place? That is all going to be hugely important to the investigation.
Yeah, Trace, we will be watching you tonight live, 11 o'clock tonight, your show, Fox News tonight. We'll be watching. Trace, thank you very much. John, we hope we're in a different place with this investigation by then.
Yeah, I mean, we had so much momentum yesterday, and it seems to have stalled out, but you never know. Things could pop any second. Great to have the Treasury Secretary on for the first time today, too.
Yeah, really loved having him. Hope he comes back soon. Everything that is about to happen with the housing market, the interest rates, it is all going to be
New Fed chairman, yeah.
Yeah. All right, thanks for joining us. I'm Sandra Smith.
And I'm John Roberts. The Story with Martha starts right after this break.
Let's check in now with Fox News chief correspondent Jonathan Hunt outside the Pima County Sheriff's Department. That's interesting detail, Jonathan. Not simply was it as described, one of my in-laws thought I looked like the image in the video, but there might be other information that led them to this man.
Yeah, and we don't know what that is, Will, but it may be a geolocation material involving that man. We do know, for instance, that he was a DoorDash delivery driver. He may have worked for other delivery services too, and had, by his own admission, worked in the Tucson area. So it may simply be that his vehicle, for instance, was seen on some sort of camera on one of the roads in that neighborhood, in the Nancy Guthrie neighborhood, around that time. We don't know that for sure. But obviously, the FBI and sheriff's deputies are following up every single bit of information they can, and perhaps they put that geolocation detail alongside the idea that he perhaps looked to some extent like the person on the doorbell camera video, and that's why they went to get him. That all played out while we were on air here last night. We saw the SWAT vehicles roll out from the sheriff's parking lot here, and within a couple of hours we heard that this man had been detained. But he was questioned for some time, a few hours, and then released. That doesn't mean he is entirely no longer a suspect, but it's clear that the agents do not believe they had enough to charge him. Sheriff's Office also telling us today, Will, that in all they have 18,000 calls, not tips overall, but 18,000 calls since February the 1st, and 4,000 of those came in the last 24 hours since that video was released. So that is a huge number of tips that they've got to follow up on, and they just hope that at some point they're going to hit on the right one, Will.
All right. Thank you for that, Jonathan Hunt.
We bring you this Fox News alert, some stunning new twist on day 11 of the search for Nancy Guthrie. Investigators racing against the clock, and they returned to both Nancy and Annie Guthrie's homes this afternoon. Two officials were seen leaving Annie's house with a bag in their hand, and they checked the mailbox as well. Now, every second counts as they try to track down this person you are seeing on the screen, caught on camera on Nancy Guthrie's porch the night she went missing. Last night, a person was detained for questioning but has been released. However, FBI Director Kash Patel says the Bureau is looking at multiple persons, plural, of interest.
I do believe we are looking at people who, as we say, are persons of interest. But as you know, with any investigation, you are a person of interest until you're either eliminated or you're actually found to be the culprit or the culprit's involved. And that's the stage we're at right now.
Let's go to Alicia Acuna, who is on the ground in Tucson. Alicia.
Hi, Kaylee. The New York Post is now reporting that the FBI has found a black glove about 1.5 miles from Nancy Guthrie's home, and it was found in the shrubbery. There was a search today, and I'll get into that in just a moment. But for right now, I want to discuss a little of the activity that our cameras caught at Annie Guthrie's home. They were here for just a short period of time. There were a couple of hours ago, an unmarked SUV pulled up. 2 men walked inside. They were there for maybe 15 minutes. They appeared to be agents of some sort, but it's also possible they are part of the Guthrie private security. Our producer shouted questions, didn't get any answers, but one of the men carried out a couple of bags from the home and the other was wearing latex gloves. We've reached out to the FBI for confirmation on whether this was part of the investigation or something else. Earlier today at Nancy Guthrie's home, this man drove up to the property and left some sort of signage with a sheriff's deputy. Interestingly, he told a local TV station he was a private investigator for the family. This is the first time we've heard of the Guthries hiring a private investigator. Also today, we have video of FBI agents who were out today in the area just to the north and surrounding streets of Nancy's house. The Bureau confirming in a statement this morning, numerous FBI agents were conducting an extensive search along multiple roadways in the Catalina foothills area related to the Nancy Guthrie investigation. Last night, law enforcement briefly detained a man in Rio Rico, Arizona, south of Tucson. Matt Finn reports the FBI tells Fox News Carlos Palazuelos was not pinpointed solely off of that footage of a person on Nancy Guthrie's Nest Cam. Kaylee, Palazuelos tells Fox News that the FBI took his phone, may still have it, so we will await updates on that as well. Kaylee?
Alicia, thank you. Let's bring in former NYPD inspector and current Fox News contributor Paul Morrow in Tucson. Paul, I'm looking at this New York Post reporting. Apparently, there's images, according to the New York Post, of these investigators pulling the glove, the black glove, which resembled that in the video, from the shrubbery. Curious, is this connected to that Catalina foothills search? And second, can they get DNA off this glove?
Well, if it is, in fact, one of the gloves that the perpetrator wore at the scenes, then, of course, this would be a very, very big break because of the possible DNA analysis that we've talked about, Kaylee. You and I have talked about it many times. It's the question I asked at the press conference, which was, will you use the IgG DNA? That is the DNA that is familial, and so you have a much, much greater shot of getting to somebody who is linked to your suspect as opposed to a one-to-one hit, which is a very, very remote possibility. That said, the idea that they've only found one glove, it's pretty far from the scene, and the fact that somebody who was very clearly extremely cautious, he was robed up foot to head to make sure. In fact, I think he was had 2 hoods on just to make sure he didn't leave any DNA. He throws one glove out the window as he leaves the scene. It's a little bit much to believe at this point, but perps do crazy things that are inexplicable, and this would be a big, big break, and I'm sure it is related to that search.
Paul, thank you. One last question, and then we're going to broaden it out in the table here. There was some new reporting from Matt Finn that the look of the individual alone in the camera is not what led to the detainment of Carlos. I would have suspected that because they would have had to have a search warrant. Any indication as to what the other information was?
Not really. I'd heard that there is, potentially some digital stuff. This is what I'm reading into that. He's a delivery driver. And they asked him, in fact, Matt Finn asked him directly, have you delivered to the house in question? And he said something like, I very well might have. So if I had to guess, and I'm guessing, I would think that they did some sort of a digital search relative to either people who have delivered to that place or people who have maybe put it into a mapping service, one of the mapping apps, to see if they can find their way to it. And they might have got a hit on him. And so the confluence of those factors got them enough to get over the hump for the federal search warrant. But remember something else, too. In a ransom situation, a kidnapping, there's probable cause and then there's probable cause. And I would argue that in a pressured situation like this, where a woman's life is on the line, that bar comes down a bit. So we do have to bear that in mind. But it sounds like there was more than one factor. A couple of things likely came together. But as of now, he's not under arrest.
Dana, I mean, I'm looking at this picture of the glove at the New York Post, and we hope it's the perpetrator's glove, but we've seen what we thought was a detainment that led to nothing.
And it's also 11 days later. So, well, if that's the case, then they just found it. That would be kind of strange. But they haven't had bad weather either, so that might be the case. I would also ask this, Paul, can you help us make sense of these ransom notes that are going to TMZ? On Newsroom this morning, Harvey Levin said an hour and a half ago, we just got another one. But it was somebody who said that they know who the kidnappers are, but they're also asking for Bitcoin. And maybe that all rings true to some. And for me, I find it just a little bit hard to believe. But I wonder if you have a better sense of that.
No, I'm with you. You know, the audience for this case is unfortunately global. And so you're talking about millions of people who are following this, and all you need is a few knuckleheads who want to pile on. The even first two that had the Bitcoin wallet, the first two emails, had the patina of a ransomware case to me. It's very similar to how the ransomware gangs operate from behind Russia, and they're impossible to get to. And the fact that they were just so completely unwilling to provide any signs of life, any images, something from inside the house that they saw, because the stuff that they did provide was very, very thin and potentially gleanable, I would argue, from media reports. So I lean against all of these letters until I'm shown otherwise. I don't know why they put the money into the account, maybe to just see if it works, maybe to see if it provided an alert to him. And so somehow or other they could see a packet move to him that said, hey, there's money in the account. Some deep dive thing that they did in the cyber world. I don't see how $300 would entice him to come forward and smoke him out. And there's also the possibility that it is bad guys, as I said, who are normally stealing identities and stuff, and they just went back to business as usual, and the $300 that's in the account is them selling identities because their attempt at this ripoff didn't work.
Jesse.
Paul, again, we're seeing investigators back at the sister's house, and we're seeing images of them taking things from the house. At this point, after a week and a half, what items could they possibly be taking away from Annie's house?
Yeah, it's a good question because they've been all over the place there. I actually lean towards it being investigators that have been hired by private security, that is, that have been hired by the Guthrie family. Here's why. The information we've had on the scene here, they haven't been in that house in a good while now. And my information is that they are outside the city someplace, but not that far off. They don't want to show themselves. They don't want to come into town. They know all the media is out here. And so my read is that those are people who are just, they send people in to get supplies for them, and they, you know, clothes and stuff. And they are being very cautious in wearing gloves and using plastic bags because they just want to make sure that there's no argument later that they in any way tainted something that could presumably become part of the case. Now, again, that's an assumption. You know, I'm not sure about that. If that is still an evidence search team, strikes me that it was fairly casual. You send two people back, they go in, they're in there for not all that long, and then they come out with a couple of plastic bags. That's not really how you're gathering evidence. You know, there are forms, there are envelopes that it goes in, that you seal it, it stays in there. You don't walk out casually swinging a plastic bag. So, you know, I lean against it at this point, still being evidence collection. But anything's possible in this case. It's been very, very surprising.
Greg.
So, Paul, I want to revisit my strategy to solving this case, and that would be having the least likely suspect, Savannah Guthrie, offer to do a polygraph, which will then put necessary pressure on others inside and outside the circle to do the same. Since no one has been ruled out, it's one step forward in ruling in, and anybody who says no or bristles looks unusual. What do you say to that?
Well, my understanding as of now is that they haven't done anything relative to a polygraph. I'm not sure we would have necessarily have heard, but I think we would, the way things have been going out here. And as we all know, it's not admissible in court, but it can be a pointer. I said, look, I am surprised a little bit that we haven't heard to that kind of thinking, more in terms of a reward, to put pressure on somebody who is potentially around the perpetrators to come forward. And I understand what you're saying. If one of the primary victims here says, okay, I'll volunteer to do this, you know, let's see what happens with others. I get that. You're trying to smoke people out that might be close to the situation. But I think a good way to smoke out people that are close to the situation is to offer a life-changing a reward. I understand we don't want to incentivize people to kidnap in the future. Of course, I get that. But at this point, with an 84-year-old woman missing for a week and a half, I think you're at the point where you got to do something that's fairly extreme. So as far as Savannah doing that, obviously that's going to be her personal call. I don't know if they've discussed it. It may argue that inside the family, they are perfectly happy with the way things have gone in terms of the investigation. Obviously, they haven't gotten their mother, but I'm going to the idea that the family has been cooperative, and inside the family, they must feel that everybody is being forthright, and that's not where the investigation should go.
Kennedy.
Paul, we heard a lot yesterday the phrase tickling the wire, which is a phrase that I am unfamiliar with, but apparently is very common in law enforcement lexicon. So we have this big break in terms of the picture, the images, the video that we saw yesterday. Did that tickle the wire? Was there a bombardment to the two phone numbers we have up on the screen constantly? And how do they sift through the information to actually find those persons of interest?
Yeah, so generally tickling the wire is used in the wiretap context. You know, you have a wiretap that isn't really producing a whole heck of a lot, and you have an investigation ongoing, and you do something outside the wiretap to get the bad guys talking about what happened on the wire so that you can hear their reaction and you move the whole thing forward. And that you usually do that with an undercover or an informant who is under your control. In this case, it's a slightly different context. Tickling the wire here, I think the closest thing to that sort of analogy is what they did with the Bitcoin, assuming that that was, in fact, the FBI to put the $300 in. Like I said, I think they were probably hoping to tickle the Bitcoin wire, so to speak, to get him either reaching in for the paltry amount of money, or maybe, as I said, seeing an alert go out or seeing him log in to check if it's there or something like that, give them a data point to work with. And the other thing, of course, that could tickle the entire wire of the investigation writ large was the release of those videos. And they had to do that. And understand, that's not an easy decision to make. We've seen it in a number of cases recently, like Tyler Robinson. They didn't want to necessarily put out that video and alert him that, hey, we have images of you, whoever did this to Charlie Kirk. But they made the mature decision to say, yeah, people are going to say we couldn't solve it, the public solved it. Who cares? You put it out if it's going to end this thing. They made that decision in the Charlie Kirk case. They did the right thing here. They had good imagery. They put it out. Hopefully, they can get more. There's an argument that what they did here, they're going to be able to continue to go forward with, do more of decoding of those code packets that ultimately produce video that they were able to recover from the cache in the Wi-Fi. And maybe you're going to get more from that camera. Maybe you could get audio. Nest cameras have audio. You could hear his voice. There's other cameras there. Maybe some of those other cameras are going to produce. We know at least one other camera alerted at some point after that camera. I'm sure they're scraping hard at that. This stuff's not easy. Google did it in 10 days. I'm sure they put their best foot forward, went at the thing that they thought was going to be most productive. But now I'm sure they're trying to get at other stuff. And so, yeah, and it may tickle the wire of somebody coming forward and saying, I see enough of that guy's walk, which is always very distinctive. That's what I'd be interested in. If we could get, even if he's all masked up, if we get 3 seconds of him really walking clearly, I think that there's a very good chance you're going to get somebody to say, I absolutely know who that is.
Let's hope we get that. Paul, thank you.
But first, breaking tonight, thousands of tips, new evidence, and a possible break in the Nancy Guthrie case. Investigators have recovered a black glove from a roadside near the mother of Today Show host Savannah Guthrie's house. The New York Post reporting it resembles the pair worn by the masked person in the surveillance video released yesterday. It comes amid thousands of tips to law enforcement in the case, including one that led police to question a man last night who says he had nothing to do with Guthrie's disappearance. Chief Correspondent Jonathan Hunt is in Tucson, Arizona, with today's developments. They keep on coming hour after hour. Good evening, Jonathan.
Good evening, Brett. The painstaking search of desert brush areas around Nancy Guthrie's neighborhood may, and I emphasize the word may, have just paid off. During their search today, as you just mentioned, investigators discovered a black glove just off the road. It appears to be similar to the gloves worn by the person seen on doorbell camera video at Nancy Guthrie's home in the early hours of the morning of Sunday, February 1st, right around the time the 84-year-old disappeared. Since the release of those videos by the FBI yesterday, thousands of tips have been flooding in, 4,000 calls to the sheriff's department alone. Now, one of those tips led to a man in Rio Rico, about 60 miles south of Tucson. He was detained Tuesday night and questioned for several hours, but then released without charge.
All I know is that they show my in-law a picture of somebody wearing a mask or something, and they supposedly look like my eyes.
Much of the ongoing investigative work continues to be focused on a potential route between Nancy Guthrie's and her daughter Annie's home, a home Annie shares with her husband Tommaso, who is believed to be the family member who last saw Nancy Guthrie when he dropped her off at her house on the evening of January 31st, just hours before the masked suspect showed up on that doorbell camera video. Now, 2 people were seen removing items from Annie Guthrie's home today. It's unclear whether they were law enforcement officers or members of the private security detail the Guthrie family is believed to have hired. We are waiting, Brett, to hear more details about this glove. It may be crucial evidence, but we should also point out that it is similar in some ways to the gloves worn by investigators as they search. So, as with so much in this mysterious case, Brett, this could be a breakthrough. It could be absolutely nothing. Brett?
All right, Jonathan, thank you.
The backpack, his clothes, his walk, the gloves, there's a lot to go on there. And that's why once this video came out, there were thousands and thousands of leads that came in. And that's the way this is going to work. But this is what you want. You want the public's help in this, because I've said it over and over again for years. The police can't be everywhere, but the public can be. So you want this video out there and as many eyes that can be on it as you can, because that's how this is going to move forward.
Let's get some insight now on the Guthrie case from Paul Morrow. He's a Fox News contributor, former New York City Police inspector. Paul, good evening. What are you taking from today, the latest? Obviously, yesterday, a lot of activity. Last night on this show and beyond. What about today?
So, Brett, investigations can be strange. They can have peaks and valleys. They crest and then they wane. Right now, today looked like we were kind of getting back into the analysis kind of thing, where they're looking at all the data that they've intaken. They're looking at the vehicle information that they have. They're fielding thousands of tips. A lot of people don't realize the GEM show is going on here. It's an annual event here in Tucson, and the city's population greatly goes up. So it felt like we were going into all of that, and then all of a sudden we got this information about the glove. And look, this could be something, could be nothing, as we constantly say, but if this is in fact something that the perpetrator dropped as he was disposing stuff, maybe in the desert, or maybe he's rolling down the highway throwing stuff out the window, I'm sure they're looking for all this. They got the drones up. But if this is indeed connected, now you can DNA type it. And even if you don't get a direct match, as we've seen in other cases like the Koberger case, you can get a familial match. And it may be 3-4 off. But with the way we have AI these days, you can get a lot really quick off of that, and then you can get to the main person by going through the family tree.
Yeah, Fox Digital had this piece from Pima County Sheriff receiving 4,000 calls just since that video has come out. Carrillo confirmed several hundred agents, detectives are currently assigned to the investigation. Meanwhile, the FBI announced Wednesday numerous agents are also carrying out an extensive search along several roadways in Tucson's Catalina foothills. You would think that over time, something would come from that. What we have received from TMZ is another note, but it doesn't seem like many people are treating that like these are the hostage takers anymore.
No, it does seem to track to some of the stuff we've seen in this case previously, which is a kind of a hoax thing, some unscrupulous person just trying to pile on and make a quick buck. Obviously, the fact that they're only asking for 1 Bitcoin when that's only slightly more than the actual reward, where you could come forward, get the reward, and be a hero. Instead, 1 Bitcoin. They gave an email address, which I'm sure has been exploited by the authorities by now, likely come up empty. We may get more on that, but you're right. I'm skeptical of that one just because it seems to be such low-hanging fruit. But I would add one thing I think that is interesting, Brett, and it goes to the fact that they're doing this search in the desert relative to the glove. In addition to having the drones up, they've brought in BORTAC. That's kind of the SWAT of Border Patrol. Why does that matter? I was just talking to somebody from that unit, and they have the ability to track in the desert. That's the kind of thing that a city cop like me can't get near. I have no idea how to do that. These guys are trained to do that. Now they're on the ground doing that kind of thing. That's a new vector in this, and I'm very interested to see if they can pick something out among all the shrubbery and brush out here that in some cases goes all the way to the horizon, if they can glean something of value.
Yeah. Paul, we appreciate it. Hopefully something.
Kyle Velwickle is a former HRT hostage negotiator. The glove, now we believe it's a set of gloves. What could that tell us?
Well, the gloves, Jesse, definitely look similar to the gloves that we see on the front porch. However, nothing's confirmed until the forensic study of the gloves verifies that they were, in fact, hopefully matching some DNA or some fibers or trace evidence that was at the crime scene, or ideally is linked back to the captor. So I'm sure those gloves are probably on a plane right now headed to Quantico for the FBI laboratory to examine.
And the guy they pulled in for questioning last night, I guess he was an Amazon driver. They released him pretty quickly, didn't they?
Yes, I don't make too much of that. They have to, as you've said already, the FBI is pursuing every piece of information that comes in. And one report I read was that, a neighbor said his eyes, that person's eyes look similar to those eyes. So, or there may be some casual link, as you mentioned, Amazon driver, he did a delivery in the neighborhood. So they're leaving no stone uncovered. That doesn't surprise me at all. They just doing deep, thorough dives on everyone they talk to in order to clear them, because they don't ever have to go back to this individual.
Yeah, when you have 4,000 tips coming in all in 24 hours, it's a lot of manpower to chase down every tip. The image that we saw of the suspect without the gun, without the backpack, do you have any idea, was that like a couple minutes after you saw him come in with those items? What's the significance of putting that out?
Well, the FBI is trying to put out more pictures in order for people to recognize it. And it's important for Americans really to understand how much passive video exists today. There's a recent study that showed the average American is captured on video 30 times on average per day. And since the FBI has those strong video captures of the porch, they're not just looking for the same face somewhere else. They're looking for the same movement signature, the gait, the stride length, the posture, the arm swing. Those are body geometry, and it's called behavioral biometrics. And when you combine that with the reality most people are captured dozens of times a day on video, it significantly improves the odds investigators can match movement patterns across multiple video environments. You can hide your face. It's much harder to hide how you move.
Yeah. When you hold back video, because we believe there's more video, there has to be if there's multiple cameras around that property. When would you expect to see that video? Hours, days? What would prompt them to put more out?
When the FBI doesn't release additional video, it's very intentional. First, investigators, they don't want to compromise active leads. There could be small details also in there that only the offender would recognize, but it also helps validate future tips that come in. And second, they don't want to alert the kidnapper to information that we may glean from those additional clips. And lastly, investigators will hold information in reserve so they can strategically provide it later if they need to generate public interest and assistance. And in big investigations, I've been on those decision-making calls with the FBI director on national cases, and I know the FBI considers information as leverage. When you provide it when it helps move the case forward.
Yeah, I guess we're all under the assumption that this guy is watching the local and national news coverage, maybe with or without Nancy, and probably changing his behavior based on what's been reported. Thank you so much for your insight. We really appreciate it.
Hey everyone, I'm Emily Campagno. Catch me and my co-hosts Harris Faulkner and Kaylee McEnany on Outnumbered every weekday at 12 p.m. Eastern, or set your DVR. Also, don't forget to subscribe to the Fox News YouTube page for daily highlights.